Today we're going to paint Zone Mortalis, and I'm going to introduce you to a secret ingredient to paint rust. And no, it's not Dirty Down Rust. I mean Dirty Down Rust. Welcome to today's video. Now, I was originally going to split this video into different parts of the Zone Mortalis kit, but that would feel like waiting for June Part 2. I figured having to open and reference multiple videos when painting would become a pain. So instead, it's one long video with chapter marks. But it does cover the entire process, so you can skip and pick the bits you need for the parts you want to paint. With this video, I had to figure out a way to explain how to efficiently paint multiple sets of rusty Zone Mortalis that had already been painted. I had planned on starting this channel in 2020 and filming it all back then, but we all know what happened in 2020. The only thing that stopped me from going insane was making terrain. Lots and lots and lots of terrain. The thing with Zone Mortalis is it's an incredible amount of terrain to paint. It doesn't matter whether you've got tiles or semi-modular parts, it's vast. And we want to paint it all in one go, get it all done and have it look good. Not just disappointingly sponged with a cheap craft paint. So think of this video as a guide to getting it all done. The whole lot. Everything. All at the same time. It's not your typical me with a brush painting tutorial. Before you disappear to watch shorts of deepfake Keanu Reeves, there's nothing here that isn't beginner friendly. If you can spray with a rattle can and put paint haphazardly on a surface, you'll breeze through Zone Mortalis. First, a teeny bit of rationale. You'll know from my previous videos that this is what my battle mat looks like, and that my weird explanation for columns and walls was that underneath it's a form of concrete, and then clad in steel, which rusted. And yes, this was totally a post-rationalization so I could justify making concrete scratch-built walls, but it works. Anyway, there's a specific order to painting a lot of Zone Mortalis terrain in one go quickly, so you don't have to back and forth between colours. You can do this with a brush, if you still want to be painting this in 2024. I had to plan this all out before starting because I ended up with a huge amount of terrain I wanted to paint all in one go. And let's face it, when faced with that much terrain, most of us stick it on a to-do list. Then we put that to-do list on a to-do list, and we don't even start. So today, watching this, I want you to get off your couch, copy this plan, and get started. Well, not yet. Finish the video first. We're going to split the job into priming, painting, and detailing. Here's the breakdown and grouping I used. It will help you. These are the colours I used for priming. Hyrax brown or matte brown, ossified earth, laser cut brown, Mechanica standard grey, grey cere, Zandri dust, demonic yellow, steel forged silver, and 2 secret sprays I'll reveal later. I know this is a lot of rattle cans, but spraying is by far the quickest way to get this amount of terrain done. So replace these brands with your preferred ones, or use an airbrush, a Sparmax Flyer, whatever you're quickest using, all except for the last secret 2. Those 2 you will need. Let's start with the column and wall tops, the platforms and stairs. You basically want all the undersides to be dark brown and all the top sides and edges to be light earth. Take just all the platforms and stairs and lay them upside down on whatever you're going to use for spraying. Prime the undersides dark brown. I used Hyrax brown or matte brown. When dry, turn them back the right way up and grab the column and wall tops too and put everything together. Do it in batches if there's too much. Prime the tops with Colourforge ossified earth or similar from the top, not as a zenithal, but to make sure the whole top part is covered. This will also help cover the edges of the platforms and stairs. I wanted these to not have one unified colour to create an aged and stained base to work with. So I took Mechanica standard grey and laser cut brown and randomly spritzed them all over, here and there, making sure the main light spray was still the major colour, so little patches here and there. I then took the dark brown and spritzed the vents. One squeeze is enough. This doesn't have to be perfect because we can fix it later. Accidentally getting it slightly off centre still works, gives a good dirty look to the edges. With the stairs, I did end up overspraying back onto the brown legs when I did this, especially at the sides. It can't really be avoided unless using masking tape, but that ends up creating a sharp line that I didn't want, so it is quicker just to spray. You should now have top and bottom primed platforms and stairs, and column tops and wall tops only primed on the top. The bottoms of these end up getting sprayed when we do the columns and walls. Okay, that's all these primed. The tops are light and patchy, the bottoms are dark brown. Set them aside. Gather together your column and wall tops and put them back on the columns and walls, but upside down. This will completely mask the top prime you've just done. Prime everything dark brown. You can totally use Rhinox hide or dark brown craft paint with a brush, but man, that's going to take time with a lot of terrain. Spray is so much faster. Now for the secret ingredient. Montana Rust Effect Spray Paint. Seriously, why do all the hard work on rust when you can literally just spray it out of a rattle can? And these are some of the cheapest sprays you can find. You can pick them up from between £7 and £9, so shop around. They've got some great texture sprays that are amazing for terrain. And because they're designed for graffiti for outdoor use in all weathers, you don't really even need to varnish your terrain at the end. There's two colours you'll need, a brown and an orange brown. You get a great effect using both. They need to be shaken up more than standard rattle cans because they have these tiny metal flakes in them that makes the rust look like real rust. All I did was spritz this in random patches over the dark brown, using brown rust first and then the orange rust. I had to be a bit more careful with the orange rust, as you can quickly turn this whole thing orange without even realising. So this one, spritz carefully and sparingly. If you've overdone it with the orange, go back to the dark brown or the brown. Let it dry, and these are primed. You can absolutely just spray railings and ladders yellow, but I opted for a Citadel Zandri Dust base and an army painted demonic yellow zenithal. Now you obviously can't lift up the ladders and railings to do a proper zenithal, as that would be incredibly time consuming and a pain. So I just left them flat and sprayed horizontal to the table. Then when they dried, flipped them over and do the other side. Now set these aside, they're primed. The doors were primed ossified earth all over and then grey cere just on the top to get a subtle gradient going from top to bottom. Set the doors aside, they're primed. All the other parts that glue to the wall, so the storage tanks, the small pipes, the computer screens, I just primed silver. I used Colour Forge Steel Forge Silver, but any lead belcher equivalent will work. On to painting. Yeah, painting terrain is not a quick process, no matter how many videos you see that say painted in 10 minutes. Sure, one wall may be 10 minutes, but 30 walls, 24 columns, 40 platforms, 50 railings, it's not really 10 minutes anymore, is it? These are the colours I used for painting. Pro Acryl Black Brown, Pro Acryl White Gold, Pro Acryl Neutral Grey, Citadel Ulthuan Grey, Vallejo Metal Colour Copper, Vallejo Rust Wash, Metal Colour Steel, Imperial Fist Yellow, Riser Rust, Citadel Longbeard Grey, Any Matte Black, Lead Belcher, and Burnt Umber Oil. There are two main parts to paint on columns and walls: the metal cladding and the interior walls inside the arches. We'll start with the metal to get everything done in the right order. The secret to the ancient steel rust look is two colours dry brushed on: Pro Acryl Black Brown and Pro Acryl White Gold. You can use equivalent colours, but I found with Pro Acryl it dry brushes for an absolute age. The pigment in these paints seem to stay on your brush 4 or 5 times longer than any other paint, so you can get much more done before you need to reload. Maybe you're wondering why I didn't use old favourite Lead Belcher. That's because instead of just following typical painting recipes, I actually looked at some old rusty steel. We don't tend to use our eyes much in this hobby. Instead of studying objects to see how colours and textures work, we just do what everyone else does. Spray black, dry brush with silver. But if you look at really old rust, there's very little silver in there at all, and the closest colour was white gold. Dry brush all the rusty brown primed parts with white gold, lightly. You only really want it on the edges. Then turn all the parts upside down and dry brush downwards with black brown. This makes the undersides of everything dirtier. Then scrub dry brush all the random areas, you want to be dark and dirty, in patches, all over. Scrub dry brushing is what I call doing it a bit harder to leave more paint. I wanted this to be subtle in some areas but dirty marks in others, even covering some of the white gold. Dry brushing with the darker colour allows the lighter orange to remain in the recesses where the rust would accumulate. Dry brushing with riser rust would just rust the raised areas, which would look wrong here. The rust needs to be in the cracks and crevices, which we always tend to cover with a wash. So no wash. None. I know you're itching to lather this in Agrax Earthshade. Don't. It destroys all the rusty recess detail. If you want more contrast, I would suggest putting Vallejo Rust Wash or Green Stuff World Liquid Pigments rust tones into the recesses directly where you want more rust. These two paints are great for realistic rust. They go on much lighter but dry to be really subtle. And that's the Rusty Steel, painted. A 3-colour prime and a 2-colour dry brush. Elevators and door frames are done in exactly the same way. We'll get onto detail later. The second part of the columns and walls are the interior walls. There's nothing complex about painting these except needing to be careful and being patient because there's so many of them. Luckily a brush just glides around on the inside of the arched shape. The base is Pro Acryl Neutral Grey. I use this because the coverage of most Pro Acryl is really good. I'm not a huge fan of painting terrain in multiple too thin coats, so I tend to opt for paints that will just do it in one. So using that philosophy, the second colour for the central highlight is Ulfluin Grey Airbrush paint. I used Citadel Air on purpose because the coverage of this with a brush is terrible, bordering on useless. But that's literally the perfect consistency for this one coat job. I just stippled it into the centres of the walls with an old dry brush, and because it's thin and useless with a brush, it dried exactly the way I wanted it to look. You can probably thin normal paint, but I'm just lazy and try to use easy, quick options to save time. There are other details like pipes, panels, lights, which can be painted or not depending on your preference. I didn't paint the lights. I considered object source lighting to make them look like they were glowing, but after looking at the sheer amount of them, I figured my time would be better spent watching Walking Dead: The World Beyond. I was wrong. Painting 90 lights would have been more fun. All the parts I did paint, like little pipes and panels, I painted with Vallejo Metal Colour Copper. Again, this is another one-coat paint. You can cover the entire part or just stipple it over the rusty prime in patches for speed and to create an aged look. The little pipes are the only part of the columns and walls that got a wash, just to make them stand out a bit. Old faithful Agrax Earthshade. That's it for painting columns and walls. You can put your brush away. The details are done with a different technique, which I'll cover later. Gather all of your platforms together and grab some cheap makeup sponges from Amazon. Mix a wash of Vallejo Light Rust with 1 part wash and 6 parts water or medium. I sponged it onto the edges of the platforms, anywhere I thought rust would form. I then took an eye makeup sponge and removed it from all the areas I didn't want rust, so raised areas and the centre of the platform. Seriously, these cheap eye makeup sponges are great, not just for oil washes but for acrylic washes too. Put the wash on, remove it where you don't want. You just need to be a bit quicker with acrylics. Once this was all done, I dry brushed everything with a light grey. I used Citadel Longbeard Grey dry paint, mainly because it was feeling lonely, underappreciated and underused. The vents. Now, I originally used the old Null Noil wash, but as that doesn't exist anymore, we need something else. I can't recommend the new Null Noil for this because you'll need 2 coats. 1 coat solutions for speed, remember? So I just thinned down any old matte black paint with water so it ran easily into the recesses. And these were easy to do quickly because it's just a circle with a raised edge to guide the brush. I then dry brushed the vent with lead belcher and stippled on some riser rust. Now you can leave it here if you want. The grey style platforms look pretty cool, but I wanted them to be a bit dirtier at the edges and cleaner in the centres. I mixed up a burnt umber oil wash. Oil washes are great for terrain because they go a really long way with very little paint. It saves you using 28 bottles of Agrax Earthshade. They do take longer to dry, but when you've got a lot of terrain to do, you can move on to something else while it dries. A wider flat brush works better for this, but basically I just ran the brush around the edge of each platform. The oil wash seeps slowly towards the centre of the platform, and after about 30 minutes or so, you can use the eye makeup sponge to just remove it from the raised areas and the platform centres. This wash slightly tints the grey to more of a brown, so the platforms match better with the columns and the walls. I just left the brown primed underside alone, You can absolutely follow all the steps from the rusty columns, but I found using these you never really see the underside. Like ever. Followed the exact same rust process for the stairs. Sponged on the orange wash at the edge of the steps, dry brushed them with Longbeard Grey, then oil washed the stairs. Then rubbed the oil off the raised areas and in the centre of each step with a makeup sponge after 30 minutes. You don't need to do any of the washing on the railings on the stairs, leave those. We'll get onto those when we do the details. This is probably the most tedious part of the whole process. Painting all the pipeworks and nuts and bolts on the tops. I love the detail on Games Workshop stuff, right up until the point that I have to paint it. I can't recommend enough using a one-coat paint here. Having to do 2 coats on 44 of these, I'd have dropped Necromunda and taken up chess. So I opted for Vallejo Metal Colour Steel. Once this is finally done, take the same burnt umber wash and cover all the metal. Set these aside to dry. These recesses are pretty deep, so drying time will be a bit longer. Mine took over 24 hours. On the doors, I masked the central section in a strip and painted the whole strip yellow. I used the new Imperial Fist yellow contrast paint because, oh my god, the coverage. Over the light prime, it just glides on. When that's dry and before removing the previous masking tape, add a new mask in diagonals. Then paint what's showing in matte black. When you remove all the tape, you'll have perfect hazard markings down the door's centre. These are the colours I used for detailing. Pro Acryl Black Brown, Metal Colour Steel, Metal Colour Chrome, Bal Red, Imperial Fist Yellow, Striking Scorpion Green, Matte Black, Liquid Pigments Dust, and the new Agrax Earthshade. And the second secret ingredient, watercolour pencils. On the railings, now paint all the bars, pipes, fans and some armour panels in a silver. I used Vallejo Metal Colour Steel. Then take Gore Grunter Fur contrast paint and paint anything you want to look brassy. Using contrast over silver metallic is one of the quickest ways to paint multiple metals on one model super quickly. A Yanden yellow or Nasdaq yellow for gold, Griffhound orange or Snakebite leather for copper. Or use speed paint equivalents. Once the railings were painted up with the yellows and the metallics, I sponged on some chipping. Dip a sponge in the black-brown paint and dab most of it off on a paper towel, then chip away. Once they're all done, wash them with Agrax Earthshade or similar. I first painted all the little rivets and the metallics on the door panel before I chipped the doors in exactly the same way as the railings, but occasionally dragged the sponge sideways across the door to stimulate scratching caused by a sliding door opening. Then panel lined the recesses with Agrax Earthshade to make the sliding door sections stand apart. Paint all the computer panels and screens completely in a silver. I used Metal Colour Steel and then gave it a quick Agrax. And again, this is where the new high pigment contrast paints come in really handy as they cover so well. Paint the screen in Striking Scorpion Green, directly over the silver, and some of the keyboard keys in Bal Red. Paint any other keys in Chrome to make them stand out. The foot plate for the door I just washed with Green Stuff World Desert Dust to create some foot traffic. On the elevators, I added hazard stripes by painting Imperial Fist Yellow directly over the white gold dry brush and then masked to make the black stripes. The chain down the sides I just dry brushed with lead belcher. On the column and wall tops, I just picked out any handles in Bal Red directly over the silver and then stippled on some random riser rust. On the platforms, I picked out some individual panels and painted over them with dark silver. And the hazard markings were done by simply painting the entire area in Imperial Fist Yellow, which over the lighter central panels covers so well. I then masked it to paint the black stripes. The railings on the stairs were still mostly ossified earth from the prime, so I could just paint Imperial Fist Yellow directly over this and follow the same chipping process as the railings. I still felt there was something missing, so I took the same yellow and painted on the foot treads on each step. Now this final push gets it all complete. Being honest with you, I can't paint a straight line with a brush to save my life, but I can with a pen or a pencil. So I went looking for something else to use and came across a box of weathering pencils that I was given as a gift, which I'd never ever considered using. After a quick test, I realised I could just draw on the rust streaks super fast using a few rusty colours. And the best part was I could do it in front of the TV rather than in the hobby room. I watched an entire season of some Korean zombie show on Netflix while drawing streaky lines on my columns and walls. I even panel lined the inside of the arches using dark grey. Much quicker than acrylic streaks or oil streaks smudged with white spirit. All the rest of the parts were just contrast paints painted over the silver prime, whatever colours you want. Then wash it all with Agrax Earthshade. Add some rust and they're done. If you're feeling particularly detail focused, you can paint tiny text on the screens by mixing some white into the green, or if you're lazy, just use a light green like Citadel Moot Green. Now you can glue these wherever you want. And that, as they say, is that. 6 tons of terrain I used to stare at with abject fear, now finally complete. You guys can totally make this your own by adding pigments, dirty down rust, extra sponging, but you have to start. It's time to get this off the never to-do list. I should reach the frontier in about 6 weeks. With a little luck, the network will pick me up. This is William, last survivor of the Nostromo, signing off. What do you mean it'll take 57 years? 57 years? Well, at least I might have 1,000 subscribers by then.